welcome everyone to our webinar. We're so pleased at the NBOA to be having the opportunity to work with our friends at IDHA and specifically Kristin Faust, the executive director. My name is Michael Glasser. I'm the president of the Neighborhood Building Owners Alliance. First of all, I have to say that hearing Pink Floyd just gives me the goosebumps and the chills. And thanks, Lauren, for your great song selection. You can DJ any party I ever have. The Neighborhood Building Owners Alliance was created probably 18 or so years ago. Over the course of time, a number of neighborhood building organizations sprouted up organically throughout the Chicago area. Perhaps the first one was the Lincoln Park Group. Shortly after that, Edgewater and Uptown merged and created YUBA, the Rogers Park Builders Group in 1992, South Shore, the Southside Community Investors, the Southside Building Owners, the SBA, the Greater Austin Group, Lakeview, and then this year, or last year actually, John Womack coordinated the launching of the Northwest Side Building Coalition. And they are fresh off a very successful event earlier today. One of the upsides, if there is one, of this tragic COVID experience we're all enduring is that my activism and involvement has caused me to reconnect with and meet many exceptional people who I'm just so thrilled to work with these folks, make these acquaintances, work with them, and on occasion through Zoom, laugh with them. And I'm looking forward to the day, which won't be too far off in the future, but unfortunately still months away, when we can gather together and share a drink or a meal and reflect on the exciting new times ahead. But right now we're dealing with a crisis, and we're talking today about one of the unique strategies that has been implemented this year. It's been a tremendous challenge and a huge effort. And I hope you can all appreciate during the course of the upcoming hour how monumental an effort it's been from IDHA to distribute in a fair and appropriate way such a large sum of money and get it into deserving hands. There can't be a better moderator for this discussion than Raphael Leone, who's the executive director of the Chicago Metropolitan Housing Development Corporation. I've had the great pleasure of knowing Raphael for years, not as many years as I've known Kristin Faust, who spoke when she was with LaSalle Bank at a Rogers Park Builders Group event many, many decades ago. But CMHDC does an exceptional job doing what really it should be a goal, and that is to create a balance between affordable and market rate housing. And he's been doing this successfully. He's respected across the board, and we're so privileged to have him working with us with the NBOA. He also has a very important title as chairman of the Landmark Commission of Chicago, and it gives me great pleasure to turn this meeting over to Raphael Leone, and I'm gonna gracefully depart the screen, but welcome everybody. Let's have a productive hour together.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you and welcome everybody. Thank you for your kind words. This is going to be an exciting discussion. It's a great panel that we have today. And thank you, Mike, for all the work that NBOA does, because it has become critical during this crisis that we're facing for renters, for housing providers. And we're so happy to have Kristin Faust today to talk about what IDHA does and how they come up with this plan that they have. Before I introduce Kristin, I would like, and I've known Kristin for quite a few years as well, but before I introduce Kristin, I'd like to introduce the remaining, the other panelists. And I'm going to just talk a little bit, just mention their names and turn it over to them so they could briefly state what they do. Let me start with John Womack.
Thanks, Raphael. Yeah, my name is John Womack. I'm the owner-operator on the northwest side. We manage about 120 units, mostly in the Belmont-Cragen and North Austin neighborhoods.
Thank you. Steve Thomas, who is the president of 5T Construction. You're muted, Steve.
Good afternoon, everyone. Steve Thomas with 5T Construction and Management. We manage approximately 900 plus units on the south side of Chicago.
Thank you. Corey Oliver, who is the CEO of Strength in Management.
Hi, I'm Corey Oliver. I run Strength in Management. We currently manage 127 units on the south side and another 50 on the west side.
Thank you. Rodrigo Carrillo, and please know that I'm pronouncing Carrillo.
Thank you, Rafael. That's how I pronounce it. My name is Rodrigo Carrillo, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Planning with the Illinois Housing Development Authority.
Thank you. Stacy Young, my good friend Stacy Young from CIC.
Stacy Young, Community Investment Corporation, CIC. I head up a policy collaborative called the Preservation Compact to preserve affordable rental housing.
Great. So as you can tell, this is a great panel. And by the way, we have 142 participants at this point. So we have a great audience to hear what IDA have to say. Kristin was appointed Executive Director of IDA. And for those who don't know what IDA stands for, is the Illinois Housing Development Authority. She was appointed to that position on November 12, 2019, about a year ago. And I bet that Kristin will never envision dealing with a crisis like we were dealing with right now. But she's well prepared to handle the situation. She brings more than 30 years of affordable housing industry experience to the authority. As the state's chief affordable housing official, she provides leadership in state housing policy to advance IDA's mission of financing the creation and preservation of affordable housing throughout Illinois. Let me also say something that when you think about affordable housing, think about two types of affordable housing and subsidized housing. And the main role that IDA has in the past, or had in the past, was to deal with subsidized housing. Through this crisis, the concentration has turned a little bit over to affordable housing, which is great. Prior to joining IDA, Kristin served as president of Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago, which is a community development organization committed to helping homeowners and strengthening neighborhoods. As president, Kristin's strong leadership and holistic vision helped spur community revitalization by creating homeownership opportunities. Earlier in her career, Kristin spent 15 years in community development banking in Chicago, primarily with LaSalle National Bank, where she studied the community development lending department. Her work in Chicago earned her distinction in Crane Chicago Business 40 Under 40. Congratulations on that. I didn't know that. So that just happened last year, right? 40 Under 40 last year. So Kristin is a graduate of Harvard University, where she obtained a master in city and regional planning, and Brown University, where she holds a bachelor's of arts in political science and philosophy. We are honored to have you in this panel and look forward to a very engaging conversation. And by the way, let me say that there will be an opportunity to ask questions through the chat. We do have a series of questions that were given to us in advance by participants, but you will have an opportunity to ask questions through the chat. With that in mind, let me turn it over to Kristin. Welcome.
Thank you, Raphael. Thank you. Good afternoon. And on behalf of Governor Pritzker and the board and staff of IDA, thank you for the opportunity to give you, members of the Neighborhood Building Owners Alliance and friends, an update on the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. We know that this assistance is vital to you as housing providers in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, just as it's vital to the tenants. And Rodrigo and I are here today as we wind down the program. We're here to answer questions, but we're especially interested in your feedback about what worked well and how we can improve upon this program should there be additional funding, which we desperately want and are working towards. So first, let me take a minute to tell you about IDA. And if there, we have a slide, Lauren, is the slide up? Okay, great. It just helped. Okay, next slide, please. And IDA is a state housing finance agency. There's one in each state, and our mission, as you heard Raphael say, is to finance the creation and preservation of affordable housing. And typically we work with property owners, developers, management companies, and lenders. And we have two superpowers, as I call it. One is that we issue the low-income housing tax credit, and it's a major tool for developing new affordable rental housing. And our other superpower is that we have bond issuance authority. So we issue bonds to finance a rental housing and also home mortgage loans. And if you're interested in learning more about IDA programs or how you might work with IDA, please visit our website at IHDA.org, and it'll give you info and direct you to people to talk to. But in times of crisis, IDA has shifted its staff and resources to provide help directly to people. We did it in the 2008 housing crisis with homeowners. And this time, the need is to help renters and housing providers like you. So next slide. And, I don't need to tell you about the need for housing assistance. You're living it every day. You've been especially living it since March. I will just tell you that the latest surveys show that 19% of tenants in Illinois are behind on their rent, and that matches our own portfolio exactly. We have helped finance over 130,000 units across the state, 1,900 properties. And in June, our borrowers were telling us they were at 93% pay, collection. And in November, they're down to 81%. So we understand and are feeling the challenges. And yet we're in the middle of this crisis. It's a health crisis. It's an economic crisis, but you're being asked to continue to house people that aren't paying rent. So at IDA, we knew we had to pump money into the system, and we wanted to do it fast. Next slide, please. Last spring, we knew that Congress was starting to talk about putting together a huge bill, the CARES Act. And so we reached out to Governor Pritzker. I talked to him and I said, IDA raised his hand. We said, there's going to be a huge need for rental assistance. We can do this. And it was not a hard sell. He understood the need and believed we could do it. We worked with the General Assembly and the governor's office. And as you may know, it was June 10th that Governor Pritzker signed the bill. What turned out to be $310 million for emergency housing assistance. It's the largest housing assistance program in the country, and Illinois should feel really proud about that. So that was June 10th, and by August 10th, we had launched the portal for applications. And we worked really, really hard to do that turnaround. And we had the portal ready to go. And as you know, it was going to be open for 2 weeks. It ended up being open for 3 weeks. By September 10th, we're ready to and started processing the almost 80,000 applications that we received. And by November 19th, we had dispersed $150 million of rental assistance, which was our original goal. And we hope to have all the money out by Thanksgiving, but demand proved greater than our original projection, because as you know, the money is not quite all out, and it's after Thanksgiving. But I'm going to let Rodrigo tell you a little bit more. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Kristin. And as Kristin mentioned, this is the largest funding program in the nation. So we had to intentionally design a very accessible program throughout the entire state of Illinois, an equitable program. And how we did that was really get the word out to the entire state about this program, the requirements, and how to apply. We had over a dozen webinars that included housing providers such as yourselves. And then we enlisted over 62 community outreach agencies that allowed us to tap into populations that have barriers to language and technology, which they were able to help with the application process. We've done tons of media, and all of this virtually. We had to really tap into the aspect of Facebook Live and ensuring that our social media was up and running. Next slide, please. And so you all know what some of the requirements were. You know, some of the highlights were that we had to ensure that the household income was at 80% or below of AMI. They had to have unpaid rent from March 1st through the time of application. And that initially we expected to assist on the emergency rental assistance side, 30,000 households. Next slide. And I can tell you what happened, what's happening as of today. So it's not, we haven't really announced this, but as of today, we're a little over 40,000 approved applications for disbursement. That doesn't mean we have dispersed all the money just yet. There is a process in this in dispersing, but we're getting there, and we will ensure to disperse close to 42,000 individuals by the end of the year. The reason we were able to do that is that what we found is on the emergency mortgage side, we saw what we initially thought to be a $15,000 average of arrearage turned out to be $8,400, which was we were able to set aside that money and put it towards ERA for us to assist more households. So that is where we're at as of today. And Kristin, I'm going to turn it over to you to finish this off.
Sure. Next slide, please. So we thought it would be a $150 million program. It's going to be a $210 million program for rental assistance. We do have the bulk of the funds out, but not quite all of them yet. We are still working on our last several thousand, and we will have all those funds dispersed by December 30th. That is the final date. But what, again, what I really am looking forward to today, again, is answering questions, but getting feedback, because we stand ready to do this again. We are advocating and ask you to join us in reaching out to the Illinois congressional delegation and the rest of Congress to let them know how important it is to pass rental assistance funds in the new stimulus package that we're looking at. The current bill being discussed, it does talk about $25 billion for rental assistance, but that's not a sure thing. And who it goes to and how it's dispersed is not a sure thing. And so we encourage you to, if you're so inclined, to reach out and to share your story about why these funds are so important. And what we promise you is that we'll continue to do our best, get this money out in a way that really helps you do what you do best, which is provide great, decent housing, be a great, responsible landlord, and really keep our housing system functioning, which we really appreciate you for. Okay.
Thank you, Kristin. I mean, this is a great summary of this program. Honestly, I have to commend IDA and you for doing this. Dispersing all this money in such a short period of time is an incredible achievement. So thank you for doing that. Congratulations. But we have heard a lot about the program too. And I'm going to ask the first question, because there was a lot of confusion about how the money was going to be used, or how people are going to be able, housing providers will be able to keep the $5,000 for future rent. Why is it that IDA needs the money back by December 31st of this year?
Rodrigo, do you want to answer that?
Yes. So these funds, per federal requirements, were tasked to address unpaid rent from March 1st through December. And what we said was any leftover monies that once you've accomplished the rent of the arrearage, to send it back to IDA. Why? Because we have to put that in a pool and we can assist additional applications that come in. We can't just put it towards another person as a housing provider. We have to address those that applied for the assistance.
Okay, so I want to make sure that everybody understands that we all have an obligation to return unused money to IDA by December 31st. And let me call on John Womack Tell us about your experience and maybe a couple of questions for Rodrigo and Kristin.
Yeah, so out of 120 tenants, we had 19 submit an application. I had notified everybody that had a balance over 1,000, and that was 9 people in August. And then 10 people, I think getting the word out must have been successful because we had 10 other tenants that applied, mostly with smaller balances as of August. They grew over time. 5 of the 19 were approved and paid out at the same time. We got the approval email, so that was nice that they came at the same time. Very grateful for that. Of that 25,000, 10,000 will be returned now. So we'll be sending back a check this week. But there were 7 that have an unknown status. So I don't know what's happening with those. There were 2 that were rejected, and I'm not sure why. I think the feedback for hopefully a second round for me would be, I think the process, if at all possible, needs to be faster. So these people that were crossing their fingers, if some of them thought it was a done deal, they're definitely going to get approved. So I think they withheld rent in some cases, and that just piles up for now 5 months. I'm a little bit concerned into next year if a new program is announced, will some people start withholding rent so that they can increase their chances of getting their application approved? A second point would be, I think we've got to prioritize the people with higher balances. So I have currently 19 people with a balance over 1,000 right now, and 3 with a balance over 5,000. So that's just grown since August, even with this program in place. And it's painful to see somebody get approved that has a balance of $1,000 when their neighbor has a balance of 5,000 and did not get approved. And then the last point I'd say is just on communication. Like, just not knowing the status along the way is tough for tenants. It's tough for housing providers. So just making it really clear and hopefully getting a quick response would certainly be appreciated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How about you, Corey?
We had 20, I believe it came out to 23 total applications, of which we received 10 payouts for. Because of our tenant population, majority of our tenants were all very, very far behind on their rent. We deal primarily with the low to moderate income communities. So they were the ones who were first line of employees hit when it came to the layoffs and things like that. So, I had a tenant at one of our buildings, she never even received notification that she was awarded the funds, until she came in, and she had been trying to scrape together some money and found out that she received her award and, was elated. So we were very grateful for that. I think the biggest issue that we ran across was multiple communications. We would receive 3 and 4 emails in regards to maybe one person, the application was received, it's being reviewed, but there was never really any clear declaration, that this person was receiving it or anything like that. So it led to a lot of confusion, especially when, we had the large multitude of tenants who had applied, and then when the money would hit the account, there wasn't always tying into, the exact person or things like that. And so we were in a position where we were trying to figure out, okay, I got this money here and who does it go to here? So I think making sure, especially like with direct deposits, because I believe with some banks, because we have different properties who deal with different banks. And so with like our PNC, it wasn't an issue, but with Beverly Bank, it was an issue. So like if it was like the small community bank, maybe not all the information made it through. And then there was no emails to follow up saying, hey, these are the people who, you should be looking out for, getting awards for. And so, I think that is something that was frustrating for us as we were dealing with this.
So one of the common thread here from Corey and John is the communications.
Yeah.
Knowing if you get a subsidy, who does that belong to, for what tenant? That created a lot of confusion, and we heard a lot of comments about that. What is your experience, Steve?
We had approximately about 103 tenants that applied. And I want to preface that because we had only expected about 42. And again, I think that there were a number of people who read and decided that they were not going to pay their rent just so they could be issued a 5-day notice and make application. Out of the 103, we had 19 people that actually received the grant. And out of that 19 right now, we're waiting for approximately 4 notifications to know who to apply those to. I want to first also step back and say that, though we are all talking about some issues that we may have incurred, the thought again of IDA raising their hand in June, rolling out this process in August, and money has hit people's accounts, a Herculean lift. And so again, I just think we all just need to thank them again for that. I think the communication could just be a little easier, and even not for the tenants, at least for the property managers or owners, so that we can communicate to them. That might help alleviate a bunch of calls going into IDA in the next round that we hope to get.
Thank you. These are very good questions. So clearly communications, but let me take this one step further, because Steve mentioned something interesting, that you got approved for 4 tenants, but you haven't gotten the money. And then you have to turn around and return the money if you're not going to use it. How will that work with IDA? So you haven't received all the money for the tenants who were approved, right?
We received money, but not the statement to know who to apply it to.
Okay.
But if we have to return it next week.
You don't know.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
So can we talk about that just for a minute? Because
absolutely.
It's a little fuzzy, and we know that. So originally, just if you think you read something that said return all the money by December 1st, you did at one point, because originally we thought we'd have all the money out by November. And then we figured that you could apply it to December rent and then just return the rest. We're now moving forward into December and still dispersing funds. So we realize that for some of you, there's going to be a lot more notices of approval and denial going out next week, right, Rodrigo?
Right.
A big batch of approvals and denials will go out next week. And so we realize that for some of you, you may not know about your tenant and that they got the money and that you have to return some until the end of the month. We understand that you may not be able to meet this deadline that we're asking. If you know that you have funds that need to be returned, if you could return them next week, return them by next Wednesday, that would be ideal, because those funds we can recycle, and we promise you we'll put them back out. But by the federal rules, we have to disperse everything by December 30, and the money has to be used just for the need established between March 1 and December 30. And because of that, I so much would love for you to be able to hold on to that money and apply it to their January rent, but we cannot do that. You've got to return it. And so really what we're asking you is return it as soon as possible. And that's our request. And if we get funds in next week, we'll be able to recycle some of those.
And that's very important to keep saying that you have to do this because the money comes from the federal government, and you have an obligation to return the money that you don't use to the federal government for all purposes. Hopefully, through Congress, there will be a new appropriation and we'll get additional money in the future, which raises one of the questions that was submitted. What is IDA doing in terms of working with the congressional delegation to ensure that additional assistance is provided? The fact is, at least in my view, and I deal with tenants as well, that I don't think that we're going to resolve the pandemic anytime soon. Even with the vaccine, we won't be able to get the vaccine for 3-4 months. And people may still be unemployed, unable to pay their rent. So what is IDA and the governor's office doing to advocate, to lobby for additional money?
Well, I can assure you that they are doing that we actually have been part of, we submitted our recommendations and the governor is pulling all those recommendations together so that the Illinois delegation can be clear on what we need. We are talking about the importance of rental assistance. We don't want it to, if it's income restricted, we want it to be at 80% an AMI and below, not lower than that. There's some indication that some in Congress would like to see it limited to 50% AMI. We think, look, we administer a lot of federal programs that are designated for lower income people, but this crisis is hitting all kinds
Everybody.
and so we think to be able to go up to, families earning $55,000 or $60,000 a year makes sense. And so, yes, but you can, yes, the governor's office is working really hard to, with our Illinois delegation to push for this.
And Kristin or Rodrigo, can you tell us what the address is? Where do we need to send this money? One of the questions is, what is the process for returning the money to IDA?
Oh, yeah. Do you have that, Rodrigo?
I will get that and put it on the chat.
Yep. That would be
Perfect.
great.
Perfect. Because as few people are asking, how do we return the money? And one of the things that I wanted to ask you, Kristin, is this money subject to an audit by IDA to the recipients?
So how do I want to answer that? So anytime that federal money is dispersed, it's subject to an audit. So IDA fully expects to get audited by the federal government, by Department of Treasury, who the money is going through. So we expect to get audited. And then they're going to ask to look at certain files that we have. And then I don't know if they'll go all the way through to you. I actually can't answer that question, but I know that we will get audited. And I just want to tell you that we really put incredible intention, but we know we didn't get it quite right. But we put incredible intention when it came to program design. And we did have to keep in mind the audit trail. That was important, but we didn't design a program just for the audit trail. We did reach out to a lot of landlords, to tenant organizations. We spent hours debating different pieces of it. Some key elements that we think helped is that when all the applications came in, we didn't do first come, first serve, right? Some of your tenants may be really good on the computer and others not so good. So we got all the applications in, and then we opened the window, and then we shut the window, and then we randomized them. So they're in a random order. Also, we opened that window on August 10th and we closed it. It was supposed to close 2 weeks later. So for people to, I guess if you're really, really thinking about it, you don't pay August rent, but you had to attest as a tenant in the middle of the month that you were behind on rent. So, so I guess I know that some people did, but we even tried to think about that. We even tried to think about not having it open like the first of the month so that people, but we couldn't think of everything, but we also sized the grant to be a size that we thought was meaningful for the tenant and the property owner, right? We made sure that the grants went to the housing providers and that this is a joint application. And every way we looked at it, it had to be a joint application, whether a tenant and landlord. I have heard some feedback that maybe next time there's a way to even let the landlord be more part of the application. And we're interested in hearing about that. But I think any way you turn it, it's got to have like the tenant and the landlord both have to sign off. Oh, I used landlord and Michael Glasser told me that's not the word anymore.
And let me expand on that, because the reason for the audit is I know that IDA gets audited all the time because of you receive federal funds, but for the housing providers, my goal was to say, keep the paperwork, keep a paper trail. This is for the housing providers because you may get a call. I'm not saying that you are going to get a call, but you may get a call if your tenant is selected as part of an audit by the federal government. So the purpose of the audit question is for you to say exactly what I wanted to hear. Maybe, maybe not, we don't know. But for the housing providers, do please keep a paper trail of the money that you have received and the expenses and the credit that the tenant that was credited with that rent. I know that Stacy has been keeping track of additional questions. Could we hear some of those questions, Stacy?
Yeah, I would say the majority, there's a lot of great questions here. There's a whole lot that talk about the challenge of tracking the money that comes in to the tenant. I think that came up with the owners on the panel as well.
So that is, so we are very clear about how important it is for the housing provider to be able to match the money that comes in with the tenant. And we know that there were problems with that in the beginning. And we have learned a lot in this process too. So for example, and you said it, I think Corey talked about it. So we thought wiring the funds would be the most efficient, that you all would like that the best, and that writing checks would take longer, be harder on our part, and just a second choice. But what we have found out is it's just what Corey said. We put the information about who the tenant is in our wire to the bank, but some banks have the ability to pass that info on to the customer and some don't. And so that is a problem, and it's not one that we can fix. And so the way to fix it is the checks. And I will confess that in the very beginning, we issued a few checks that didn't actually have the tenant's address on it. We fixed that quickly. And we are, when all is said and done, probably at least 30% of the payments going out will be done by check. But it is a problem we don't quite have a way to fix, but we've got to fix it because we don't necessarily want you having to call us. Right now, that's what I think you have to do. So by the way, if you need that question answered, you email communications with an S on it at IDHA.org, communications@IDHA.org, and say, your property address, tenant unit, et cetera, and or explain your situation, and we can try to answer that for you.
And just to add on that communication, so please utilize communications@IHDA.org. Please include the landlord full name that's on the lease or property management, the landlord email that was utilized for the application, and phone number and property address. That would be very helpful, and we can identify who the tenant is and get back to you.
And this program, Rodrigo and Kristin, applies pretty much anybody who's under 80% of median income. Any housing provider could apply for that. And I said that because Sharita Logan asked the question whether there is a special place for MAP and PAP landlords, small landlords. And yes, this applies, and I want you to confirm this, this applies to whether it's 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 300 units, they could apply as long as the tenant is under 80% of median income.
And also to point out that the federal requirement was that an individual suffered an involuntary loss of income due to COVID-19. And that is one of the main requirements for this program.
But we did, just so you know, and I need Rodrigo's here to help. So for 2 to 4 flats, it was a little different. So if you owned a 2 flat, we asked you to go through the mortgage assistance program. Right? And then at above 3 units and above, we sent them to rental. Is that right, Rodrigo?
Correct.
So,
okay.
So if you owned a 2 flat and, and you lived in it,
Owner occupied.
Yeah, let me just qualify that. So the one difference is if you lived in a 2 flat and rented out the other unit, to get your assistance, you would go through the mortgage assistance program. Everybody else, if you own a 4 flat and you just rent them all out, you would go through the rental.
Okay. And I have to ask this question because everybody's asking the question. Is there any chance that the housing providers could keep this money and carry forward to January? I know you have said it, but I want everybody to hear that again.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
There was they were trying to, there was people lobbying Congress to try to get that. I mean, who knows what they're going to pass before year end, but we don't see all indications that we have is there will not be language in the bill that allows that to happen, that funds have to be applied and used just and only through December 30.
Yeah, and here's an interesting question, because you're going to get some money back and you're going to disperse more. And here is from my casa. I have a few tenants that owe over 5,000 and did not receive approval. They also did not receive rejection. Does it mean that they're still being considered?
So they should have received communication that their file is still in review. We've sent, the last communication was in the beginning of November that we're still reviewing files. If you've received a denial, that means the file was reviewed and denied. And if you've received an approval email, that means it has been approved. Those that have not received a determination of their file means it more than likely is still in a final review. We anticipate all communication of denials and approvals to be out no later than December 30th.
Can you give us some of the reasons why people were rejected?
So let me give you the top, just off the top of my head. On the housing provider side, proof of ownership was a big reason why file applications failed. Proof of unpaid rent, meaning either they were lacking that proof, or some tenants were actually current, so therefore could not be approved. On the tenant side, proof of address was also a major denial reason. Their ID did not match their property address, and there wasn't sufficient documentation given to prove that address.
Okay.
And Rodrigo, when a denial goes out, it goes to both the tenant and the housing provider, correct?
Correct. The way the system is designed, that both denials and approvals are targeting two sets of communications. We have encountered that some tenants have incorrectly placed an email that doesn't belong to them. They don't have access to it anymore. So therefore it's hard for them to know, and therefore didn't get a communication.
Okay. John, Steve, Corey.
I actually have a question. With the second round then, so if, let's say the money all comes back in and you guys start making determinations on the second round, and somebody runs into the same situation with the second round of money, is that going to be another $5,000 based off of the people who already applied, for you guys? And then in that event, what happens if that person doesn't have a $5,000 balance? Are they going to then be looking at returning money in January or something like that? Or, I mean,
Yes.
Here is another question. Housing provider received notification that 2 tenants have been approved, but he never received the money. So is that still in the making?
Yeah, so there is a time frame between approval and disbursement. So there could be a 7 business day lag time there. If the housing provider asks for a check, that could be a 3-week delay. So the best bet is to inquire at communications@IDHA.org to get verification as to what date funds were sent.
Oh, this is an interesting question. Remember that at the beginning, I mentioned the difference between affordable housing and subsidized housing. Here is a question. Is there any help for landlords who have subsidized tenants who have income but still do not pay rent? I do know for a fact, though, before you answer that question, that if the subsidies from Section A, and Stacy can correct me on this if I'm wrong, if you have tenants who have Section A vouchers and they have been affected by the pandemic and they cannot make their rent payment, they could apply to Section A voucher program for reconsideration, so the Section A program will cover that portion of the rent as well.
It's an income recertification. That's right. So they go back to, CHA and say, my income changed, and CHA makes that change.
But in a way, I think that through this pandemic, the subsidized units are the ones that are probably performing better, because the subsidy are there from the federal government, from the city, and from the state. So yeah, the tenants may have problems paying their portion, but the majority of the subsidized rents are being paid.
And this program was not for those units.
Correct.
That's right. That's right. And that's what I say, that I commend IDA for doing this, because IDA traditionally works in the subsidized affordable housing arena, and this is completely different. This is open to everybody who qualifies at 80% of median income, who has been affected by the pandemic, and being able to pay rent for those tenants who are unable is an incredible help, especially now when people are not even getting the $600 unemployment check that was provided by the federal government through July.
Right.
Raphael?
Yes, Steve.
I had a question. As an owner, is there a specific place that we should actually be trying to email or call, looking for a new round of funds?
So I think right now it's really up to Congress, the United States Congress, to pass another stimulus package, and that they've designated rental in it. Right now, if you read what I read in the paper and what I hear from our contacts in Washington, D.C., is that there is money being earmarked for rental assistance. We just got to keep the pressure up and let our representatives know that, yeah, it's needed and it matters. So I would say your congressperson, your senator.
Right.
Yeah.
This is an interesting question, because I think that people have to use their judgment on this. I have a tenant that paid rent in October 2020, but also sent in a letter that this rent payment is to be used for January 2021 rent. Is this okay? I just posted the questions. and this is tough. This is tough because I don't think that we can do that. I mean, if you receive the subsidy, you cover the rent with the subsidy.
So we really can't address any future payments. I mean, anything that the $5,000 covered is from March 1st to December 30th, 2020. Anything beyond that is between the housing provider and the tenant.
Can I ask, have you guys thought about, for the second round, trying to implement some sort of process tracking system that people could log into to see, here are the 10 steps, you're in step 4, it's been approved or rejected?
That's a good.
So there's a little chicken and egg here going, which is, so that would be an ideal system. Those systems usually take longer to put in place. We are a quasi-governmental agency, but we are subject to state procurement laws. So that is, yeah. And so it's hard because, because until we get the money, we don't know if we have the money to do it. And then once we get the money, you guys want the money fast, and we want to get it out to you fast. And so we had to work with the systems we have. But yes, we are interested in working towards something like that. But if there is another round of funding, and if it got approved in December or January, I don't know that we'd be able to get that in place in time for that next round. But we understand, just so you know, we really hear clearly that it would be an ideal system if you could log in and kind of see where your application is. Mm-hmm. You had to put something together really fast for it to handle, what ended up being over 80,000 applications. Also, some of the communications, I'll just say this, like the denial communication, it could have just read your application was denied. But then we had this debate, well, people want to know a little bit of information, but we don't have the ability to go through and tell everybody why their application was denied. So we came up with a sentence that was kind of like, it was denied because either of insufficient information, or I can't remember the other thing. And I know that's unsatisfactory to other people too. We just tried to give you as much as we could and then to go forward. But one of the things I'm hearing, and we will and can improve on, is communications, how we communicate, how we say things, how often we communicate, and the importance of course, like fundamental, matching the payment to the tenant. And we get that loud and clear. But it's always a struggle to have to send out the denies. And if you're not sure, if something doesn't seem right, like you got one communication but not a follow-up, go ahead and email the communications@IDHA.org. That's what it's there for. And we have a call center also. I mean, we have people that are there to work on these.
Here's an interesting question about the income of the individual. What is the look back period to determine 80% of AMI? Is it before they lost their job or after they lost their job? So when do you determine if they qualify at 80%?
Yeah, go ahead, Rodrigo.
So the determination for that was pre-COVID-19. So anything pre-COVID-19, if you were 80% AMI, you would qualify for this program.
Okay, good. John?
Well, I was going to say, back on the process, I mean, I can understand having the system in place is tough. Even if in the communications, you outlined what the 10 steps are, and then when you're saying the documents have been completed and you're not to the approved state, then people know, okay, I'm not to the finish line yet. Just knowing what those steps are, I think would be helpful.
That's good. That's helpful. Thank you.
Do you guys know of any other programs? One of the questions is, are there any other programs out there besides the IDHA program for tenants to apply, or housing providers?
Yeah, so the city of Chicago had a program. I believe that they're finished, but Cook County is still administering some funds through the Cook County Land Bank. And you can look up the Cook County Land Bank and reach out to them. They're giving I think it's $600 payments. So a few counties, Lake County, adjacent to Chicago, were able to get funds from the federal government to administer their own rental assistance programs.
Stacy Young just put the link for the Cook County program on the chat. Here is, let me look. Can a denial be appealed?
No, there's no appeal process.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
And you guys are getting ready for using the remaining money between now and December 30th. You have enough applications that you can select, or selected by lottery, right?
Right, because right now we have more approved applications than we have funding for. So we will be releasing another round of approvals next week, but because my staff would love it if I just sent them all home on December 18th and said, we're done, but they actually don't want to do that. I've got people wanting to work over the holidays, wanting to work so that up till the very last day on the 30th, we can try to process. We have a long list, right, of randomized approved applications now that don't have funding. And every time the recycled money comes in, we can send out another, approve another one of those on that list. That's pretty much what we're going to be doing these next couple of weeks.
And here's a clarification regarding the Section 8 tenant. That the Section 8 tenant cannot recertify because their income did not reduce. If they lost their job and they lost income because of the pandemic, I believe that they could be recertified. So I'm pretty certain that that's the case, because I've been in panels with CHA and they said specifically that if the tenant lost their job, reducing their income, they could apply for recertification.
That is true. And in the CARES Act that Congress passed, a huge allocation of funds went directly to HUD for that group of tenants. And that's why it was important that a separate allocation go out for the non-subsidized tenants. And that's what we administered. And that's what we want to keep fighting for, because a lot of people think HUD, and HUD's really important. They're a partner of ours, and the subsidized tenants, but we know that the need is greater than that.
Yeah. Good. Steve, do you have a question?
If there's a round 2 and it's opened up for people to apply, will there be a preference to those who may apply and not got it versus those who may apply a second time and have received a grant the first time?
I can't answer that right now, and we'll have to talk through that one. Also, I would like pose to you, I mean, do you think it would make sense to have like a minimum threshold of being $1,000 behind? But that means anybody who's less than $1,000 behind doesn't get to apply. Where would you like to see that threshold? Again, we designed what we tried to make a pretty simple application that didn't take a lot of reviewing time, processing time. So we didn't pay attention to how much somebody owed. We just knew that they owed something. That's all we cared about, right? Because that's how you get it out the door faster. So one way, yeah. So we know that you have some tenants that owed a bunch of money and didn't get anything, and payment tenants that owed a little. So we're looking, a question we're asking is, 1, should we do a minimum threshold? 2, would the landlords be willing to input a little bit more data, like probably the same data that's in your lease, but how would you feel if you had 4 more data fields that you had to input as part of the application? Would you feel okay about that? Was it onerous? Do you think you could do a little bit more? Because we're seeing that might improve the quality of the app and lower the number of rejections.
I don't think the application was onerous from an owner's perspective, and I don't think that an owner would have many more problems, would have an issue with answering 4 or 5 more questions, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll do a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And so just, that's how we designed it. We try to minimize the amount of documentation that a tenant would have to provide. And we knew that housing providers would be able to do it. Also, just to add to Kristin's point, we also knew when we designed this program that people were going to be impacted by COVID-19 at different points of the time. So whether someone was impacted immediately in March, there were those that were being laid off in the summer. And so their amounts are not as high, but the need is just as much as the next person. So we knew that.
Well, I think that it's also going to come down to whenever that would be enacted, right? Like if we're enacting a second round in February, and we can have, I think we all have good tenants who are sitting there trying to scrape their pennies together to make sure that they can get their rent, and they may only be $900 or $750, but you could give them some relief going forward is a lot different than getting somebody who's at $1,000 behind in November and you only have 2 months to try to figure something out. So I think that is going to matter. I don't think any owner is going to be against giving more information to make sure that the proper tenants get have the better opportunity to get selected. But again, I think based on how fast Congress moves and how fast you guys are able to get the funds and to reallocate and to do what needs to happen after that, I think it's going to dictate on a floor. So if we're sitting here again in June and the next thing is coming in and we're looking at August and September for disbursement again, then yeah, I think at that point, we got to sit there and say, okay, we need a $2,000 floor, a $1,000 floor to make sure that the people who have the greatest need are the first to get funded, and then whatever's left gets dispersed to whoever needs it.
This has been very, very educational and informational. So thank you, Kristin. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you to the panel. But before I turn it over to Mike, Kristin and Rodrigo, any words of wisdom here? Things that we should be looking for?
I would say, first of all, just keep paying attention to those emails, right? And through just at 12:30, I would say. And secondly, I want you to know that the governor, the IDA board, the IDA staff, we are really pushing for more funds and hopefully have more funds come in 2021. And lastly, I want to say thank you to all of you, because we are very clear that that this pandemic, you are just a key part of providing affordable housing out there, right? And so we know the tenants, they went through their savings very fast, right? It's gone. But we know that the landlord savings is not infinite either. And so we're very aware that you guys have done your best to maintain and go forward, but we want to do everything we can to help you sustain going in the new year. And we appreciate what you're doing right now, to work with tenants, to try to work out payment plans, to be patient, and all of that you're doing. We know it's really hard. And Rodrigo, did you want to add anything?
No, just to echo that, because we've heard the stories of how housing providers were going above and beyond and helping tenants, not only in trying to find ways to assist them, but helping them with this application process. We have heard that they have set up computers, seeing different tenants all at once. It was just overwhelming, the stories that we continue to hear, how housing providers really, really advocating for their tenants. So thank you so much for that.
And one thing that I want to emphasize too, that this is a program for the entire state of Illinois. It wasn't just for Cook County or for Chicago or Will County, it's for the entire state of Illinois. And thank you so much to IDA for doing this, because as I said at the beginning, this is not your area of daily routine work that you do. You do subsidized housing, which is great, but the majority in this group provide affordable housing without even knowing. And I think that one of the good things about this, if there is anything that is good, is that people know now that they have tenants at 80% of median income, that they're providing affordable housing unbeknownst to them. So thank you so much for doing that. And with that in mind, I'll turn it over to Mike.
I can't. I'm stuck.
You're stuck? We can hear you.
I can do it audibly. You're not going to see my picture. Okay.
Oh, we can see your picture.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't know it was on. Listen, this was terrific. I love the format. I loved everybody's questions. I loved the moderating. I loved Rodrigo and Kristin and everybody. I just think it was very informative. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We look forward to a safe and do our best to have as joyous a holiday as we can. And together we're going to get through this. And let's keep at it. And the housing providers will stay strong and show the grace that we need to, and also make sure that our needs are taken care of by advocating for what's needed. And with that being said, have a great day, and we'll hopefully have good news in the future. Okay.
Happy holidays to everybody.
Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. Great to see everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.